So I've entitled Writing Lecture 7, Basic Research Strategy. So the purpose of this lecture is not to explain how to do research or the specific things involved in the process of doing research, but rather it's a very broad and general outline of how to approach a research article. And what I mean by that, we'll be able to discern what I specifically mean by that as we go further into the lecture. So the purpose of this lecture is a basic introduction on how to get started in writing a research paper. And as always, once again, I want to remind you to utilize the Writing Center resources, make appointments with Writing Center advisors, and check out previous lectures and notes on this process of writing a research paper. And the required reading that I will be requiring you to read for the writing portion of this course is related to research and how to utilize resources through the Fuller Library website. So, one of the first things I want to recommend as you're about to begin this thing called research, and as you begin to do research and prepare and to come up with basic parameters on how to approach research, is to think of research as a kind of filter. You need a filter in order to filter out some of the impurities and the unnecessary information that oftentimes can bloat a paper. So the filter allows you to focus on the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why of the paper, so that the paper does not become too broad or meandering or starts talking about or go off into tangents into things that are might be useful and good information, but it doesn't really fit what the research paper is all about. For the final research paper for this course, there are certain restrictions in terms of page limit, and so you really want to be able to filter out unnecessary information. Just as, and many times you shouldn't just drink tap water, but you should use a filter. So you want to be able to focus and narrow the research. So then the next question, naturally, is what kind of filter do you need? So, step one, the first filter that you would need is to ask, what does the instructor want? Every single course you'll be taking at Fuller will have a syllabus, and more likely than not, each syllabus will have instructions, specific instructions on what the instructor wants and expects for the various papers and assignments that are due. So step one is to read the syllabus really carefully. Look at the grading rubric, look at the sources that the professor recommends, etc., as well as look at the instruction on how the paper is to be structured. What does the professor want the paper to do? And many times the syllabus will recommend what sources to use, whether it be primary sources, secondary sources, biblical commentaries, etc., what methodologies or tools to use, what kind of writing it is, whether it be a book review or an exegetical review or a research paper or a forum post, etc., what field of study it is. Our course is a theology course, a systematic theology course. So, of course, the primary sources you'll be using, the secondary sources you'll be using will more likely than not be theological sources. But if you're taking, say, an NT 500 New Testament course, you'll want to use New Testament sources, etc. So read the syllabus really carefully. That is step one. So then what would be step two? If step one is all about thinking about what the instructor wants, step two, what do you want? What do you want to write about? What topics, what themes are you particularly interested in handling? And so the part of step two is brainstorming ideas, brainstorming topics, brainstorming arguments you want to make. And you want to think about maybe and how you want to do that. Maybe you can focus on specific theologians or doctrines, say Barth's doctrine of salvation or Karl Rahner's doctrine of the Trinity, right? So these are general themes, topics, not quite an argument yet, but these are themes and topics you want to think about. What a theologian says about a particular doctrine. But I want to remind you that writing a topic about, say, this paper will be about how Barth talks about the doctrine of salvation. That's not really an argument. It's not really a critical argument. It's really just a summary of what Barth said in the past. And so what you want your research paper to do, the thesis, the research question that you want to ask is, what's something new that you can contribute? What is a specific argument that you yourself can make? Another way to approach that is to compare and contrast theologians on a specific doctrine. So if the previous question was about how Barth talks about salvation, you can maybe compare and contrast what Barth says about salvation and what Pannenberg says. What methodologies each theologian uses, how are they different? What presuppositions, what contextual background? One comes from another country, one comes from a different country, right? So those are all things that you can start thinking about as you start to develop your own specific thesis. And these are some of the filters that helps you narrow down your paper. So, after thinking about broadly themes and topics, you want to come up with a preliminary thesis, an initial thesis. This is not the final thesis, but an initial thesis to get you started on your research. And a helpful way to think is in terms of relationships. This was on the worksheet that I required you to read. For example, the argument that you can make is the relationship between X and Y, or say Barth or Pannenberg, can best be explained as Z, or the primary causes of A are B, C, and D in that order. The major contribution of A to B is its unique explanation of C. And so if this is a kind of preliminary thesis, your research will proceed with trying to demonstrate and argue this thesis. And as you find sources and as you make the argument, then the preliminary thesis can change a little bit to match the research that you have done. So